while safely enclosed within the confines of faster-than-light travel. Commander Redford took the opportunity to brief Wyatt on the current political situation. As someone born outside the aristocracy, Wyatt hadn't been afforded the kind of education that covered the intricate and often volatile dynamics among the noble houses. Fortunately, that lack of pedigree hadn't hindered his rise to the rank of warrant officer. He had a sharp enough mind to grasp the overarching reality, and what he saw was far from reassuring. Duke Dramore's treachery ran deep, and his influence extended further than anyone had anticipated. If the prince had any hope of standing against the Duke's expanding power, he would need to rally every possible ally and form a united front. The journey through FTL's space passed in a near haze, and before long, they dropped out into real space only to be met by a modest gathering of loyalist vessels. 21 ships greeted them, small in number, but clearly prepared for conflict. It wasn't a fleet capable of launching a full-scale assault, but its defensive formation was tight and purposeful. At the heart of the formation was a cruiser that stood out from the rest. Its sleek design and full-body armament made it the centerpiece of the flotilla both visually and tactically. Wyatt assumed correctly. This was the fleet's flagship. The royal yacht maneuvered alongside it with ease, and both vessels entered the enormous hangar bay, which had ample space for their size. As Wyatt stepped out of his worn, utilitarian transport, he found himself surrounded by a level of technological sophistication and opulence that far surpassed anything he'd experienced in his military career. The crew members hardly glanced at him as he disembarked, but the atmosphere shifted the moment Commander Redford exited the yacht. Every uniformed individual in the bay snapped to attention. Seeing the commander on his screen didn't do justice to the man's presence in person. Taller by a full head and clad in a uniform that likely cost more than a standard-issue shuttle, Redford radiated authority. Warrant Officer Wyatt Staples stood quietly, taking it all in. "I thank you again for your support and your loyalty. Walk with me," Commander Redford said, his voice firm and unmistakably authoritative. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a direct order. Wyatt gave a simple nod and fell into step beside him, trailing silently as they made their way through the polished corridors of the flagship. As they walked, Wyatt couldn't help but take in the grandeur of the vessel. Every hallway gleamed, and each panel whispered of advanced engineering far beyond what he'd grown used to. Old long-buried dreams, surface childhood fantasies of serving on a ship like this. Unlike many of his peers at the academy, who clung to lofty ambitions, Wyatt had always tempered his expectations. He never saw himself piloting or commanding one of these behemoths, but working on board, even in a low-ranking position that had once seemed just within reach. And yet, even now, standing inside such a marvel of military engineering, it still felt like a dream he didn't belong in. Do the junior nobles, or even the bastards lucky enough to get assigned here, how fortunate they are, he wondered privately. He already knew the answer. Wyatt kept his face neutral, burying any trace of bitterness. Like most commoners, he harbored a mix of envy and quiet disdain for the ruling elite. But he was no fool. He knew better than to let it show. Outwardly, he was the picture of obedience, never allowing a hint of discontent to creep into his tone or posture. That said, his loyalty wasn't feigned. While he had no affection for the pompous aristocracy, he believed in the principality itself. He wasn't some rebel yearning to see nobles dragged through the dirt or die screaming in the void. Still, there was no harm in letting the occasional sarcastic thought stay locked safely in his head. No one could discipline him for his imagination. Eventually, they arrived at the bridge. A handful of officers and crew were already at their stations, focused on their duties. But one figure stood out among them, all a tall man, in a regal blue uniform, trimmed in gold. A flowing cape bearing the crest of the royal family hung from his shoulders. When he turned around, Wyatt recognized him immediately. It was the prince, seeing him in the flesh for the first time. The young royal's appearance was even more striking than any broadcast or holovid could capture. Tall, just slightly shorter than Redford, he carried himself with both grace and power. His physique was balanced, overly muscular, but certainly not slight either. His eyes, a vivid violet, shimmered with intensity. Wyatt noted they were either the result of rare genetic design or high-grade implants, the kind of augmentation that costs more than his last 10 years of salary combined. But more compelling than any of that was his expression, calm, poised, yet filled with purpose. There was fire behind those violet eyes, the gaze of a man determined to reclaim what was his by right. That look alone made Wyatt snap to attention instinctively. "Report, Commander Redford," the prince said, his voice smooth yet commanding. Redford immediately began his account, clear, concise, professional. He described the attack, their narrow escape, and how the situation unfolded. When he finished, the prince let out a quiet, contemplative breath, then turned to Wyatt. "Warrant Officer Wyatt Staples," he said, his tone formal, but not cold. There was strength behind it, the kind that carried weight. Wyatt stiffened even more. Being addressed directly by the prince himself was something he had never imagined. "Your actions today saved the lives of many loyal citizens, and more importantly," the prince continued, "you saved the lives of my family. For that, I owe you a personal debt." Wyatt's thoughts spiraled. Is this real? Am I dreaming? Did I actually get hit by that missile back there and now I'm just hallucinating during my final moments? But the pounding in his chest and the intensity burning in the prince's eyes left no doubt. This was real. Trying to steady himself, Wyatt cleared his throat and responded. "Your Highness, I only did what I believed was right. I'm just a commoner serving and protecting as expected of me. I can't possibly be owed anything." He spoke as calmly as he could, doing his best to keep his nerves from surfacing. To his surprise, the prince allowed himself a faint, knowing smile. "Warrant Officer Wyatt Staples, your actions embody the very ideals upon which the principality was founded. Don't diminish what you've done simply because of your birth," the prince said firmly, eyes unwavering. "Whatever your background, you're the one who ensured the safety of those dearest to me." He took a step closer, his voice resolute. "Loyalty is its own reward, but true valor should never go unrecognized. As of this moment, you are hereby promoted to the rank of lieutenant." The words hit Wyatt like a shockwave. He instinctively took a step back. Even Commander Redford looked taken aback by the sudden promotion. "My prince, I'm honored, but I'm just a commoner. Isn't this against protocol?" The prince raised a hand gently, but firmly. "Under ordinary circumstances, you're right. Tradition and law wouldn't allow such advancement, but these are not ordinary times. Before I am a prince, I am a brother, a man, and we stand on the edge of chaos. I won't let bureaucracy stand in the way of justice and loyalty." He paused before continuing, his tone more somber. "Your courage today shows everything Duke Draymore lacks in his men, and I suspect your bravery is only the beginning of what we'll need in the difficult days ahead." Only then did the full weight of Wyatt's new reality begin to settle in. This wasn't just an unusual event, it was the beginning of something far bigger. "I'm just a pilot," he thought, "not even a real combat pilot. I fly evac ships and now I'm standing on the front line of what could be a civil war." The thought struck him harder than an FTL drop. "Commander Redford," the prince ordered, "escort Lieutenant Wyatt to his quarters. Ensure he's registered in our personnel logs. Let him rest and prepare." The prince turned, his cape trailing behind him as he strode away. "Welcome aboard, Lieutenant Wyatt Staples." Wyatt mumbled something incomprehensible in return. He could barely process anything. Redford placed a hand on Wyatt's shoulder and began guiding him gently out of the bridge. Only once they were deep within the ship's corridors did the older man speak. "Don't get lost in your thoughts. Wyatt, Redford said quietly but firmly. Wyatt blinked and looked up at him, still dazed. Huh? I know you're overwhelmed. You're not nobility. You didn't grow up with this kind of pressure or expectation. But don't overthink the battles ahead, Redford continued, his voice calm, stoic, easy for you to say. Wyatt thought, his bitterness surfacing. You've got rank, wealth, and influence. I've got nerves and a survival instinct. There's going to be a war, isn't there? Redford nodded. It's already begun, quietly. Soon the noble houses major and minor alike will choose sides. The prince is doing everything he can to prevent a civil war, but make no mistake, he will not surrender his claim. He paused, then added more softly. You've already chosen your side, Lieutenant, and it's the right one. Be proud. You didn't just show courage, you acted with honor when it mattered. Redford's expression grew more solemn. Even if you hadn't helped me, this conflict would have found you eventually, probably in a worse position, and without a choice. Wyatt gave a small, reluctant nod. He's right. We commoners rarely get to choose where we stand when the nobles start fighting. I suppose it's better to be caught in it this way than dying for a commanding officer's ego. A faint smirk tugged at the corners of Redford's mouth. A fortunate perspective? After a few more steps, the commander stopped in front of a door. This will be your cabin from now on. You've been logged in the ship's manifest. Rest up, you've earned it. Thank you, Commander. Take care, Wyatt replied, still unsure if he was walking through a dream. Redford gave him a firm nod before turning and walking away. Wyatt placed his hand on the panel beside the door. It hissed open, revealing a modest officer's cabin, a desk, a small fridge, an empty shelf, a bed, a nightstand, and a private cubicle for shower and toilet. For a noble, it might have been simple. But for Wyatt, who had spent years crammed into shuttle bunks and reeking evac stations, it was pure luxury. He stepped inside and laid on the bed. His thoughts were still racing, heart still pounding, but the exhaustion caught up with him fast. In moments, sleep claimed him deep and dreamless.